Now you're probably wondering, Kat, didn't you read this book 3 years ago? And that answer is yes. And you're also probably wondering, is it 2017 again? And frankly, I cannot tell you. I don't know what year it is. I don't know what day it is. We're quarantine time, baby, all right? So it could be 2017 for all I know. Hello everybody, I'm Kat and welcome to Kat's Corner, where today we are discussing Lord of Shadows by Cassandra Clare. This is the second book in the Dark Artifices trilogy. This is my favorite Shadowhunter book, period. I don't think there's a book that I will ever love as much as I love this one. And that's why I reread it. I wanted to see which Dark Artifices book I loved more. Was it Lady Midnight or was it Lord of Shadows? We knew it was not Queen of Air and Darkness, okay? I don't know a single person who actually likes that book. But anyway, I'm here with Lord of Shadows today. This is my favorite Shadowhunter book, and let me go grab my notes so I can actually be coherent. So this book was so much fun a second time around. I had forgotten so much of this book, so it almost felt like I was reading it for a first time because I only really knew like 2 scenes that happened in this book, and then I remembered how it ended. That was all I knew. So going into it, it really truly felt like I was reading it for the first time again, except I had a vague idea of some of the stuff that happened, if that makes any sense. The format I read this on was audiobook, and this was my first time listening to this on audio. When I reread Lady Midnight earlier this year, I listened to that completely on audio as well, and I do plan on rereading Queen of Air and Darkness completely on audio. But I will go into more depth about my opinions on the audiobook in the spoilery section. Let's just say it made for an interesting read because, unpopular opinion, I was not a big fan of the narrator of this book. I honestly prefer the woman that narrated Lady Midnight, and I wish she narrated all 3 of them, but she didn't, and I'm upset about that, but whatever, it's fine. The one thing I did remember about reading this book was that it was very slow when I read it, and it took me like a month to read. I felt like it was very slow paced, and it was such a slow burn to finally like get to where we were going. But this time around, it was literally a breeze. The only thing I can compare it to is like a season of Stranger Things. You know, with the Stranger Things season, it cuts to like the different characters. So you're with the kids for a scene, and then you're with Hopper, and then you're with the older kids, and then you're with Joyce. You never get bored of being with a single character. And that's what Lord of Shadows was like the second time around, because it would go from Emma and Julian to the twins to Mark, Christina, and I was so hooked the entire time, and it was so much fun. If you're someone who has read it and you were like, this was boring AF, try rereading it, because rereading it went by so much faster. I was so much more hooked into the story, and I genuinely had a hard time putting it down to pick up other books because I was participating in other readathons as I was reading this book, and it got very, very hard to put down this book for readathons. That's all I can really say for a non-spoilery section. I will say that even though I have read Queen of Air and Darkness, this review will not have any spoilers for Queen of Air and Darkness. It will have spoilers for obviously Lord of Shadows and Lady Midnight. But if you have not read Queen of Air and Darkness, you can stay. I will not say a single word about that book in here, okay? But if you have not read Lord of Shadows, I would suggest you log off now, unless you don't care about being spoiled, because sometimes it's fun to watch reviews of books you don't plan on reading, you know? Bye, non-spoilery people. All right, I'm gonna put down this beautiful book because even though it's beautiful and has my favorite cover of all time, I'm gonna put it down for now, but I'm gonna talk about the cover later. Boom, we open up with Lord of Shadows, and it takes place like 2 to 3 weeks after Lady Midnight. We have Emma and Mark dating, and we have Julian in the corner like, dear diary, it's been 2 weeks since I got laid and now she's dating my brother. We start off with Kit's point of view once again. Kit grew on me so much with this reread. I just have a newfound appreciation for him. I love him a lot more than I did when I first read Lord of Shadows. He's just an all-around great character, and I'm so excited to see where his character goes. Jace gives him James's ring, and the amount of references to Chain of Gold in this book was kind of insane. I'm not going to spoil Chain of Gold for those of you who haven't read it, but I'm just going to say, like, I read Chain of Gold right before I read this book. My brain was like, oh, James Harrendale, oh, the Merry Thieves, oh, Cordelia. I've connected the dots. There are so many references to Chain of Gold in this book, so if you haven't read Chain of Gold and you just finished Lord of Shadows, you should go read Chain of Gold, and then you'd get all the references. Or vice versa, if you just read Chain of Gold, but you haven't read Lord of Shadows or you haven't read it in a while, reread Lord of Shadows. Do it, it's so much fun. And then we have the Centurions, and honestly, what I wrote in my notes here is, and I quote, "I hate Zara ugly." You can see it up there. I hate her. Christina honestly deserved better. I never liked Diego from the beginning. From my first read, I didn't like Diego, and from the second reread, he did not grow on me. So there you have it. She deserves better. We don't stand perfect Diego here, okay? We don't. Moving on. The Julian and Kit scene where Julian's in the car, that scene was so funny to me. It must have flown over my head when I first read it, but that scene was just like a moment that I wish we got more of Julian and Kit together, because the two of them together were just, that was such a great scene. I love that scene. So then we have all the angst between Julian and Emma. Y'all, it was almost too much sometimes, but it made me laugh when it got too much, so hey. And poor Julian is stressed all the time in this book. I feel bad for him. Like, I genuinely do. So then they go to Fairy. This was one of the three things I remembered from Lord of Shadows, right? I said I remembered 2 plot points in the ending, so I knew what happened at the end. But I remember they go to Fairy, and I remember I loved this part of the book. But I didn't know why they went to Fairy. I didn't know what happened when they went to Fairy. I just knew they went to Fairy, and I loved it. So I was so excited when Julian was like, oh man, we gotta go to Fairy. I was like, yes, we do have to go to Fairy. And honestly, the part in Fairy and Lord of Shadows is probably my favorite part of the entire trilogy. We have even more angst in Fairy when Julian kisses that fairy because he thinks it's Emma, but then Emma thinks that, oh, he doesn't love me anymore. It worked, but he doesn't. Their communication skills are something else. For people that have their own like language that they like draw on each other's arms or whatever, they don't communicate. And then we have Christina and Mark, and they're going to the revel, and I don't know why Christina went, because she knows better. Like, out of everyone in the group, she knows the most about Fairy, and that's like part of why she goes along with them. She still goes to this revel, and I'm like, Christina, you know better, girl. Don't do it. Okay, and then we have the scene at the Unseelie Court cut with Malcolm returning. The way that scene is edited is so brilliant. I can't even tell you. I listened to that scene when I was falling asleep because I use audiobooks to help me sleep. I was like wide awake, like, oh my god, Emma's fighting. Oh my god, the Malcolm's back. Oh my god, Emma saw her dad. Oh my god, like the Blackthorns are going to London. What's going on? The way that scene is edited, that is the best edited scene in all of the Shadowhunter Chronicles because of the way it's cut, and it keeps you so on the edge of your seat and you want to make sure everything's okay. And oh my gosh, I love that part. Also, that part when Julian held that prince at knife point, I was kind of scared. I was like, oh lord, where did that come from? So then they escape to Sealy, and this part was again super intense, and I was like, oh my god, they have the knights like coming at them. It's like that scene in Tangled when they're like walking through the cave and then the knights come out of them and then they're like out on the cliffs. You know what part I'm talking about? That's basically how this scene is, and it was so intense. And like Julian and Mark were carrying Kieran, and I did laugh though when Mark said that Julian was swearing the whole time, because that part was really funny. But then they get to Sealy and they arrive at Mark's aunt's house, and sure enough, Emma and Julian go up to their room and there's only one bed. Cassie pulls this on them twice in this book. Okay, not once, but twice. It's crazy. I laughed during that part when Julian's on the bed. If you know, you know. That scene was so funny. We get to see Kieran and Christina kind of bond more and let their relationship develop more in this book, which I really appreciated this time around. Julian constantly wants to be sick throughout this whole book. Like, this dude needs to go on some anti-nausea pills, right? Because every other page it's like, Julian felt sick, Julian wanted to be sick, Julian felt like throwing up. Then just do it. No one's judging you. Come on. The dude needs a Xanax prescription and an anti-nausea pill. So they return to London, and this was another thing I remembered, obviously, because the cover has London Bridge on it, right? There you go. London Bridge is falling down. Or is Julian falling down? We don't know. So speaking of the cover and the title, Lord of Shadows. So obviously, Lord of Shadows refers to the Unseelie King, and we know this because Neen refers to the Unseelie King as the Lord of Shadows, and everyone read this book went, oh man, title spotting. I love it when that happens. But I feel like it's also a reference to Julian in this book because we kind of see this darker side of him in Lord of Shadows. So I feel like it's kind of like a double entendre where it's like, it literally means the Unseelie King, but I feel like it also kind of means Jules, especially because he's on the cover wearing the puffy shirt from Seinfeld, which isn't explained. With the other covers, you know that the Lady Midnight cover is the part where Emma's drowning. The cover of Queen of Air and Darkness, if you don't already know, it's the epilogue of Lady Midnight where Annabelle opens her eyes. This is the only cover that doesn't connect to a scene in the book, so it's kind of different in that way. But like the one thing that kind of bugs bugs me about it is the fact that he's literally wearing the puffy shirt from Seinfeld and it's not explained. Like, at least with the Lady Midnight cover, Emma's wearing the dress that she wore to the lottery. The Queen of Air and Darkness cover, I think it's supposed to represent the red blood of Annabelle, like after she murders Malcolm and her white dress is like stained red. I think that's what that's supposed to represent, but this cover makes zero sense to me. I'm gonna have a Julian Defense Squad moment here because I'm gonna defend him for a little bit here because I'm a Julian Blackthorne stan first and human being second. Let's get down to it. We have this scene before the writers of Manon come and visit the cottage. In that scene, Julian is very clearly spiraling. He's clearly upset over the fact that Emma now knows that he's still in love with her, and Emma thought that she had forced him to stop loving her, but he hasn't. He's loved her since he was 12, right? During this scene, Julian is very clearly spiraling, and this is where I have an issue with the audiobook narrator. So the audiobook narrator is James Marsters, and he was like some character in Buffy that all of the other booktubers love because they grew up watching Buffy. I did not, okay? I'm a little young for that, and I honestly don't ever plan on watching Buffy as of right now, but everyone loves this dude, right? He voices Julian like Julian is a 60-year-old smoker. I said what I said, okay? He makes him sound like a 60-year-old smoker, and it bugged the living daylights out of me. But the other thing is during this particular scene where Julian is a 17-year-old boy literally spiraling about the fact that all he wants to do is protect his loved ones at the end of the day, and he regrets the decisions he made as a 12-year-old in order to protect Emma because he loves Emma too much to be her parabatai. And in this scene, the narrator makes Julian sound like a cartoon villain who's trying to like manipulate Emma, and it annoyed me so much that I literally stopped listening to the audiobook and I sat on my bed for like an hour straight staring at the wall thinking, why did he do that? Because Julian is clearly upset during this scene, but he made Julian literally sound like a villain, and it upset me so much. And also another thing, I know people have come out and they're like, oh my god, Julian slut-shamed Emma and was like, who's next, like on your list of boys. It's actually written so he actually doesn't slut-shame Emma. He's just upset over the fact that Emma broke Mark's heart, because if you actually read the scene, he doesn't care that she broke his heart. He doesn't really care that she broke Cameron's. He's mad at her for breaking Mark's heart, which we all know she didn't actually break Mark's heart. Mark was just in it for the money. So he's not actually slut-shaming her. He's upset over the way she treated his brother because with Julian, it's family first, right? At the end of the day, he's still a 17-year-old boy, and 17-year-old boys aren't exactly the sharpest tools in the shed. And even though that Julian is probably the most mature Shadowhunter character simply because of the situation he's in, he's still a 17-year-old boy who does not know how to communicate to the girl he likes, alright? It's very simple. Should he have taken it out on Emma the way he did? No. He could have done it very differently, but he's still not mature in that sense. He's still very much a teenager. Moving on, the fight between the writers was again super intense. I appreciated Emma's fighting skills and her warriorness in this book so much more. She is everything. I love her. I love Emma Carstairs. The burn down the church scene was like kind of random. I know it was written in to show both Emma and Julian that they still loved each other, but it was kind of random and like weirdly like sexy. And for no reason, they're burning down a church. I was like, this is why y'all need Jesus. You're burning down a church with your sexual tension. And then of course, there's only one bed in the cottage. You heard it right. And those scenes where Emma and Julian wake up and they realize like they're like all tangled up together and Emma rolls out of bed and like screams as she falls, that was pretty funny. That was like rom-com-esque humor right there, and I appreciated it. Okay, and then we also have this part where Julian is reading Malcolm's diaries one night as Emma's sleeping, and Julian is like, oh my god, I relate to Malcolm. And this is where people who hate Julian will say he's the true villain of the series. But I just want to take a moment and say, before you claim him evil, this is actually the connection to Annabelle Lee. So most of Cassie's books are based on a certain work of literature, right? So the Last Hour series is based on Great Expectations. The Infernal Devices, I believe, is based off of A Tale of Two Cities. And then, of course, The Dark Artifices is based off of the poem Annabelle Lee. And it's very obviously shown in Lady Midnight, with the lore being that Edgar Allan Poe wrote the poem Annabelle Annabelle Lee after hearing about Malcolm's story. But this is also where we have the other connection to it, is when Julian is reading Malcolm's diaries and Julian relates to Malcolm, because Julian's character is based on the narrator in the poem Annabelle Lee. If you haven't read the poem Annabelle Lee, you should read the poem and then you'll realize that's just Julian, because it is. This part was really cool because you see the connection between Malcolm and Julian, but mainly Julian and how his character was based off of the narrator in Annabelle Lee. And by the way, Malcolm is my favorite Shadowhunter villain, period, because of his development, just so we're clear. And then we get into more politician Julian. It was honestly so genius of him to literally take photos of the Black Volume of the Dead. And I know a lot of people were like, he must have only taken like 5 pictures or whatever because he did it in such a short amount of time. But the Black Volume of the Dead isn't very big. And that's like its kind of thing. It's basically kind of like a pamphlet. So he only needed to take like what, maybe 10 photos max. But it was so genius of him to have that backup plan when he's talking to Annabelle, because he knew Annabelle isn't going to recognize what an iPhone is. Also, the fact he took it with his iPhone 4 because it's like 2012 made me laugh. So when I first read this book, I did not cry. I just kind of stared at the book and my mouth dropped open and I was like, why would it end the way it did? Nobody knows. I don't usually cry in books though, just so we're clear. Like the only book I've ever truly cried in was The Fault in Our Stars when I read it like 6 years ago. I put off reading the last chapter for, I'm not kidding, like a week because I knew what was gonna happen. And so I would listen to like 10 minutes a day, inching towards the end. And then I got like down to the last 20 minutes and I'm like 1 minute a day. And then finally on this hike, I was like, I'm just gonna finish it. We're just gonna get over it, you know, we'll do fine. So I'm hiking, right? I actually got really choked up when Julian called Libby sweetheart, and that part got to me. Like thinking about it is making me emotional right now. But I was like getting choked up. Honestly, I probably would have cried if I physically read this part. But of course I was listening to the audiobook and the narrator did a poor job once again narrating for Julian. And he made Julian's like emotional voice sound like super weird and fake. Julian kind of like screams, I guess. And when the narrator did that, I was like, oh. The only thing that kept me from crying was this narrator's poor job of narrating for Julian. I'm not even kidding. I got close to crying. I was getting seriously choked up. The part that got to me wasn't so much like the stabbing or like the Arazzi disappearing. It was honestly when Julian called Libby sweetheart. That's when it got to me and I was like, oh my god, we're in it for the long run. And then the clock chimes, which brings us to Queen of Air and Darkness. That is it for this review. Let me know down below if you've read Lord of Shadows recently, like I have. If you share the same opinions of me. If you've forgotten Lord of Shadows like I did, because I did not remember a single thing about this book except how Livy died. And even then I forgot about most of the ending. Like I forgot about the mortal sword, the whole thing. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I post videos on Thursdays and I will see you in the next one. Bye!